Welcome to the world of ancient Rome. Wherever you are, whether you re-nestled beneath a wool blanket against the evening chill, or the world has finally begun to quiet around you, I invite you to close your eyes and take a long, slow breath. Let its coolness fill your lungs, stilling the quickened pulse of daylight hours. But our attention is drawn not to the soaring arches of justice, but to the bustling activity around a cluster of Phalanca workshops. These workshops, with their pungent mixtures of urine, vinegar, and ashes, were where the city's garments came to be cleaned. You feel the ground tremble beneath your feet as a procession of soldiers marches by, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. The murmur of their passing is soon replaced by the excited chatter of senators heading to the Senate House, their voices echoing in the vast space of the basilica. A trial is in session, and you hear the crowd stir as the renowned orator Cicero enters the basilica. It was also about survival, the struggle to keep body and soul together in a city that offered little in the way of safety nets. You turn down a narrow alley, the air growing thick with the smell of stale waste. It's the sum of its parts, the grand and the grotesque, the beautiful and the brutal. It's a place where lives both epic and ordinary unfolded, where the echoes of ambition, despair, hope, and hardship still linger in the ancient stones. So now, dear listener, it's time for us to leave this world behind, to rise from the dust and grime and step back into the light of day. I hope that as you go about your life, you'll carry a piece of Rome with you, a newfound appreciation for the complexity of human experience that this incredible city so vividly portrays. Until next time, may your days be filled with the echoes of laughter, the whispers of history, and the enduring spirit of those who walked the ancient streets. The flickering lamplight reveals a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman, her face haggard, hair matted, sits amidst a pile of rags, her eyes vacant. Nearby, a young boy rummages through a discarded blanket, searching for something to eat. On the ground before them lies a small dog, ribs showing through its matted fur. The woman, they tell me, is called Anutricia, a beggar whose desperation has driven her to the brink. She sits there day after day, hoping for a handout, too proud to beg openly. Her son, no older than 10, scavenges what he can find, his small hands sifting through the refuse of the city. And the dog, well, it's just another stray in a city where life is cheap and death comes easily. You hurry on, shaken by the scene, eager to escape the clutches of poverty that seem to tighten around your throat. His voice, they say, can turn the hearts of men. The atrium is a marvel of Roman engineering, a miniature garden bathed in the warm glow of lamplight, complete with a fish pond and a fountain. Here, among the marble columns and frescoed walls, you encounter Cornelia, a woman who navigates the world of Roman elites with the ease of a veteran. She is adorned in fine jewelry, and her laughter rings out, echoing the gaiety of her noble upbringing. With a wave of her perfumed hand, she dismisses her slaves who prepare her bath, their faces obscured by the shadows. You watch as she slips into the warm water, the flickering light dancing in her bright eyes. Her laughter subsides, replaced by a thoughtful silence. The weight of her status, the expectations and pressures that come with being a Roman noblewoman, settles upon her shoulders. The tranquility of the bathhouse fades away, and the clamor of Roman life returns. The city, with all its grandeur and squalor, beckons once more. As he speaks, the crowd leans in, captivated by his words. You too find yourself drawn to the sound of his voice, and for a moment, the stink of stale urine and dirty linen fades away. You imagine yourself as a lawyer, pleading his case before the great judges of Rome. Imagine yourself there, a Phalanca worker. Awaking before the sun crowns the Palatine Hill, you wipe the sweat from your brow. Grateful for the shade cast by the tall buildings surrounding the forum, you duck into the shade of an awning, intrigued by the sight of a lead tablet hanging on a wall. It's covered in strange markings, and you realize they're letters, a secret message written in lead. The graffiti scratched onto the wall, a curse against the unworthy. The scratches on the lead offer a glimpse into the hidden anxieties of everyday life in Rome, a city where success and failure hung precariously in the balance. The language is archaic, the spelling uneven, but the sentiment is clear. The writer curses those who have wronged them, invoking the dark powers of the underworld to bring them down. In the cramped confines of a Roman tenement, residents scratched out their hopes and fears on whatever surface they could find. Lead tablets like this one were popular for their durability and portability, used for everything from business transactions to love poetry. But this particular tablet speaks of darker matters, a desperate attempt to harm another through the power of curses. Such curses were a common feature of Roman religion, a means by which ordinary people could exert some control over the capricious nature of fate. The curses on the lead tablets were typically directed at individuals who had caused harm or offense, invoking the gods to inflict suffering in return. They also served as a form of social control, a way for marginalized groups to express their frustration at the injustices of the Roman world. By taking a curse to the gods, the powerless hoped to level the playing field, to make the mighty tremble in their sandals. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out near the Colosseum. The roar of the crowd is deafening as you make your way through the throng, curiosity overcoming any desire to escape the heat. There in the vast amphitheater, you see gladiators locked in combat, their movements swift and deadly. The air grows thick with the smell of blood and dust. The crowd cheers and jeers, their excitement palpable. But you feel a strange emptiness within you, a disconnect from the violence unfolding before your eyes. You long for the simple routine of your workday, the comforting familiarity of the Phalanca, your small room, shared with fellow workers, offers little respite from the heat, even in the cool of night. You dress quickly, the coarse linen of your tunic offering scant protection from the elements. Breakfast is a hurried affair, a crust of bread dipped in stale wine. And soon, you're on your way to the Forum. For tonight, we embark on a journey, but not one into sleep. Not yet. Instead, we drift away into the worn, dusty corners of the past, where time itself grows languid, like the heat waves rising off sun-baked stones. This is a world not of emperors' grand halls or the gleaming marble of Rome's monuments, but one that clings to the edges, the backstreets, the overfilled tenements, where the masses lived and labored. It's a descent into the underbelly of the ancient world, where the gears of Rome, as great machines of progress, were greased by the sweat and labor of the forgotten many. The air is thick with the cries of vendors, the clatter of carts, and the lowing of cattle brought for sacrifice. But amidst this clamor, the rhythmic sloshing of water from the Phalanike provides a strangely soothing counterpoint. Inside the workshop, your shift begins with a long meditative task, treading the fuller's earth. A mixture of clay and small stones that softens the fabric and helps remove dirt and grime. Each step is deliberate, measured, a silent prayer to the gods for strength and patience. As the morning light fades, replaced by the harsh glare of midday, you plunge your hands into a nearby vat, the icy liquid shockingly cold against your heated skin. Yet there is a purpose here, a cleansing ritual that parallels your own daily toil. This is where the urine, vinegar, and ashes come into play, each ingredient serving a purpose in the complex alchemy of cleaning. Urine, a natural bleaching agent, is used to whiten fabrics, while vinegar softens the cloth and prepares it for the final stage, the scrubbing. In the center of the workshop, a large basin filled with a gritty cleaning paste awaits, where each garment receives its final touch before being rinsed once more and laid out to dry in the hot Roman sun. Throughout the day, you move between these various tasks, the rhythm of your work a solace in the midst of the frenetic energy of the Forum. Your muscles ache, your feet are blistered, but you work on, sustained by the quiet pride of a job well done, a small measure of order brought to the heart of a chaotic city. Here, amid the laundry vats and garbage heaps, we will meet the nameless faces of the Empire. Their stories are echoes, carried on the wind, fragments of lives lived at Rome's bustling heart. Our first stop is the Forum Magnum, the very center of Rome, where the great Basilica of the Law stands bathed in sunlight. Here, the day unfurls in a haze of dust and noise. But even as you work, the energy of the Forum ebbs and flows around you. The day stretches on, and as the sun climbs higher in the sky, so does the heat. As the afternoon deepens, the crowds begin to thin, and you find yourself drawn to a quieter part of the city, at a narrow street lined with shops and workshops. But the Roman world was not solely about the clash of ambition and despair. As dusk begins to settle over Rome, you find yourself standing in the atrium of a wealthy townhouse, the scent of incense and perfume masking the distant stench of the streets below. And as you stand there, caught between two worlds, you understand that Rome is more than just marble and monuments. Rome was the most opulent city in the Mediterranean world. Its architecture, its art, its clothing were unmatched anywhere. But how did those clothes get clean? Let's find out. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. And since sanitation wasn't really a thing back then, let's just say they had a lot of work. Now, when I say Falonica workers, I mean both men and women who performed this task. And to make matters worse, they did this on foot. And if you were walking around in the night in Rome, it was risky business. Not only could you step in some waste, literally, but you could also get mugged. So some fullers carried around sticks to defend themselves. Also, the job itself was dangerous. See, the fullers didn't use soap to clean the clothes. Instead, they used urine. Ah, how bitter the pay for so much toil and sweat. When a man is hired to clean another's fine linen, his own clothes hang in rags upon his body. And slaves could wash their own clothes, but they had to do it on their own time. This meant that most slaves had to wake up even earlier than the professional fullers, like before sunrise, so that they could wash their clothes, do their assigned chores, and then return to whatever other labor awaited them. The main difference between a slave who washed his own clothes and a professional fuller is that the slave did it on his own time. Until then, remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, but the Colosseum was built in 8 years. Slaves weren't allowed to own much of anything, including tools. So a slave who wanted to wash his clothes would probably do it in a public bathroom. He would have to bring his own water and scrape and scrub his clothes by hand. Slaves couldn't afford fancy soaps, so they probably used a paste made from ashes and water. The ash would create a sort of saponaceous reaction when mixed with water, which helped to remove dirt and grime. Roman society was divided into 5 classes, and the fullers were considered to be in the lowest class possible, even below merchants and prostitutes. But since slaves didn't receive payment, you could argue that they were doing all of this for free. And to add insult to injury, the clothes they cleaned were a symbol of wealth and power. They cleaned the clothes of the Roman nobility by stomping on them while submerged in human waste. As you can imagine, this wasn't the preferred job of anyone in Rome, especially since there were much better jobs available. But alas, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. At least they could keep their eyes closed while they were stomping on the clothes and imagining they were treading on the necks of their enemies. Yep, urine was considered to be a great cleanser, so instead of using modern science, they used pee. And since urine was a rare commodity, the fullers would hang jars in public places where people could pee into them. This stuff would be known as Falonica jars, and they were everywhere. They were hung outside taverns, outside shops, even in the public bathhouses. You know, the one place you'd expect. Women tended to do the actual washing, and the men were usually in charge of carrying the clothes from place to place. See, the vats that held the urine were pretty heavy, and the fullers needed help getting them where they needed to go. Well, the work of the fullers was pretty simple, really. They would take the dirty clothes and submerge them into the urine. Then they would start stomping on the clothes to remove any dirt or grime. And once that was done, they would take the clothes and wash them in either boiling water or cold water. That's right. The fullers didn't have hot water like we do today. Once the clothes were cleaned, they would take them out and lay them on a rooftop to dry. And also, they were usually slaves. If you weren't born a Roman citizen, well, you weren't born with much hope for your future. If you worked for a wealthy family, he would earn a decent wage. But if he worked for someone poorer, well, he would be paid less. Fortunately for the fullers, though, the richer people could afford to buy nicer clothes, meaning they had to clean more of them. So you can imagine that a fuller who worked for a rich person actually worked more hours than someone who worked for a poor person. Since these workshops were small businesses, usually owned by freed slaves, the fullers were usually treated pretty poorly. They worked long hours, were exposed to terrible smells, and got paid very little. And if you weren't strong enough to be a gladiator or work in the mines, you were probably relegated to a life of cleaning other people's underwear. Today, we are going to talk about one of the dirtiest jobs in ancient Rome. This is an episode all about the Falonica workers of ancient Rome. What was their job like? How did they clean the clothes? And what was their life like in the Eternal City? Let's jump in. The Falonica workers were the cleaners of ancient Rome. They washed the dirty clothes of the Roman people. Their workday started very early. Like all Romans, Falonica workers woke up when the sun began to rise because, hey, that's free light and heat. It was normally around 4 a.m., and that gave them time to prepare for the rest of the day. If they were lucky enough to have their own apartment, which was unlikely, it would probably be at the back of an insula. An insula was basically the Roman version of an apartment building, except the richer people lived in them, and they could be pretty dangerous places to live. Not only were they crowded, dark, and unsanitary, but they were also built cheaply and often fell apart. They were also prone to collapse. If you want to learn more about insulae, check out our podcast. We have a whole episode dedicated to it. And since there were no garbage trucks or modern plumbing, everything from human waste to broken pots to leftover food would pile up in the streets and the gutters. And since these insulae were poorly built, they were constantly falling apart, and new ones were always being constructed. So finding a spot to dump your waste wasn't hard at all. So you can imagine what it smelled like living in Rome. It was so bad that there was actually a saying, "Beware of the full of nights," referring to the nights that the Phalanca workers went around collecting the waste that the Romans threw in the street. Once the Phalanca workers collected the urine, they would take it back to the workshop, and this is where the men came in handy. The amount of money a fuller made depended on how well off his master was. Here's a great quote from the Roman poet Martial about working as a fuller. One interesting fact about the Phalanca workers is that they were the only ones cleaning clothes in ancient Rome. If you were a slave in ancient Rome, it's likely that you did a lot of things besides clean clothes, such as cooking, gardening, or carpentry. So that was the life of a Phalanca worker in ancient Rome. This is a presenter from the channel. And today we are discussing Cicero, Rome's sleep-deprived orators. Have you ever been up late working on something important? Maybe you have a big test tomorrow, or you're putting together a presentation for work. For Cicero, there were gains to be made from his sleepless nights, at least in the beginning. See, Rome wasn't exactly the land of opportunity, and climbed higher and higher in Roman politics until he was, for a time, the most influential man in Rome. He held the consulship, the highest office in Roman politics. Do you plan on reading any of Cicero's work? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking and subscribing. Till next time, thanks for watching. But the insomnia persisted. As Cicero grew older, it only got worse. The truth is that insomnia tends to get worse with age. As we get older, we tend to worry more. We ruminate more, have more regrets. And so naturally we have more trouble sleeping. All the mistakes we've made over the years, all the opportunities we've missed, all the moments we wish we could relive, they come rushing back to us at night, and they prevent us from sleeping. But oddly enough, Cicero seems to have been immune to this. While other senators dozed in their seats during debates, Cicero stayed sharp, attentive, and focused. In fact, according to his contemporaries, it seemed like Cicero's insomnia helped him in his career. Plutarch writes, Cicero's mind was exceptionally clear and orderly. He was able to observe the relations of everything to everything else, and he could remember everything he had once said or heard. These abilities came to him naturally, but he trained them by constant exercise, so that he had the appearance of having a prodigious memory and ready wit. Cicero was able to keep track of everyone in Rome and what they were doing, every alliance, every betrayal, every secret affair. He kept careful notes, recorded every interaction, and filed it all away in his mind. By all accounts, it was a remarkable feat. Cicero literally built an empire on his insomnia. It was a city ruled by inherited wealth and title. After decades of tireless work, his health finally broke and he died believing that it was the end. But strangely enough, that wasn't true. In fact, Cicero's story doesn't end here, not really. Because while his body was laid to rest, his mind continued to live on. That's because Cicero's writings, the letters, the speeches, the treatises, they continued to influence the world long after he died. Today, we read Cicero to learn how to argue and persuade, to better understand ancient Rome, and to marvel at the complexities of his mind. Why, perhaps the strangest thing about Cicero is that despite all the things we admire about him, his brilliance, his passion, his unflagging determination, despite all of that, we can also empathize with him, with his fears, his anxieties, his troubled sleep. For Cicero was a man who accomplished everything, but he was also a man who never slept. And if you've ever been up too late working on something important, if you've ever sat hunched over your desk watching the night go by, then you can understand the strange allure of Cicero. If you weren't born into the right family, your chances of rising high were slim. And that was precisely Cicero's problem. He wasn't born into one of Rome's richest families. In fact, he was born poor. But Cicero knew that he had one thing that no one could take away from him, his brain. Cicero's talent was his intellect. his ability to convince, persuade, and control. And so, when he was young, he traveled to Athens to learn from some of the greatest philosophers of the age. There he learned how to hone his skills, how to train his mind and sharpen his thinking. And upon returning home to Rome, he put those lessons to use and quickly became successful as a lawyer. Cicero knew that his mind was his best asset, but being a lawyer isn't exactly a 9-to-5 job. His clients needed him at a moment's notice, and he could find himself tied up in court for weeks at a time. Add to that his responsibilities as a politician, and it's easy to see why Cicero never got much rest. But unlike his predecessors, the other wealthy Romans, Cicero hadn't inherited his money. He earned every coin, and therefore he worried about losing it all, feared looking like a fool in court, losing a case, or worse, losing the favor of the people. In an ancient Rome, when you lost the favor of the people, you lost everything. And so Cicero worked tirelessly to stay on top, to stay relevant, and keep everyone happy. He attended banquets, hosted parties, schmoozed potential allies, and made generous donations to the city's temples and public works. As the night goes on, the stakes feel higher and higher. But he could never truly rest because the Roman world demanded so much from him, because he demanded so much from himself. In his essay on duties, Cicero reflects on the burdens of responsibility and the inevitable toll it takes on one's life. He writes, "Very often in public life, the strain of anxiety causes loss of sleep and ulcers, and even the fever itself." And for Cicero, this was no mere hypothetical. This was his reality. He famously awoke in the middle of the night convinced that Pompey was marching on the city at the head of an army. And indeed, a few months later, Pompey did march on Rome. See, Cicero's mind didn't just race during the night, it raced constantly. He would wake up mid-conversation or stop abruptly while reading a book, plagued by worries of war, corruption, and insurrection. One evening, he retired to bed, went to sleep, and woke up in the middle of the night. I hear, he writes, the crowd shouting, "Fire, fire," and imagine that the whole city is in flames. And then I call out to the guards and ask if they really do hear the shouting. And thus I pass the rest of the night. Sometimes it was worse. In another letter to Atticus, he writes, "My mind is disturbed by 1,000 fears. My sleep is broken by dreams, for I either dream that I am giving a speech, or that some disaster has fallen on one of my children, or that I am being dragged to prison, or that I am being chased by some wild animal, or that a fire is raging. Or sometimes, indeed, these things happen in my actual waking life as well." It sounds terrible, doesn't it? But for Cicero, it was just another day. Your mind races from worry and distraction. If you know this feeling, you'll probably also recognize its effect on your body. You might find yourself hunched over your desk, your eyes staring blankly ahead, willing yourself to keep going. This feeling of exhaustion mixed with terror and obsession is a powerful one, but it's also a familiar one. And in the case of today's subject, it was all too common. This is part 2 of our series on famous insomniacs. So if you haven't already, be sure to check out part 1, which looks at Dostoevsky. Otherwise, let's dive in. Cicero was a man who valued his sleep, or so he claimed. He frequently wrote about his love of a good night's rest, and he even wrote an essay on the importance of sleep. But Cicero was also a man with responsibilities. He was a lawyer, a politician, and a writer. And as such, he had very little time to spare, at least not if he wanted to succeed. And so while he spoke often of his desire to sleep, he also spoke frequently of his inability to do so. Throughout his letters, there is a refrain, a recurring motif that links each new day to the last, a terrible and unrelenting weariness. Now, why does this sound familiar? Perhaps you have experienced it yourself, or perhaps you have witnessed it in someone else. Sleep deprivation is a hallmark of stress, of course, but it can also be a symptom of something more clinical, more instinctual. Much like our previous subject, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Cicero was a worrier. Like Dostoevsky, he tended to ruminate long after the sun had set. In his letters to Atticus, he writes of anxious nights spent pacing his house, unable to settle himself. He longs to sleep, but instead thinks and thinks until dawn. I am afraid, he writes, that my nights are too wakeful, my days too much given over to business, so that there is nothing left for reading and study. But this, too, is a lie. For Cicero did find time to read and study, he simply found less time to sleep. In fact, insomnia was the price he paid for success. But throughout it all, Cicero remained exhausted. He struggled to get out of bed in the morning, aware that another long day awaited. Now, for years, Cicero's mind raced. He delivered speeches, won cases, but eventually Rome would catch up with Cicero. Today, I'm excited to bring you along to the British Museum here in London, where I'll be discussing a few favorites among our Roman lead tablets, or depictions, as they renown. If you're new here, I'm an archaeologist who researches Roman Britain. I'm currently finishing my PhD at a university in London. My research focuses on material culture from the Roman province of Britannia. They were commonly discovered buried beneath altars or thresholds, immersed in springs or wells, concealed within the walls of buildings, or encased in the foundations of structures, occasionally wrapped around objects such as mirrors or amulets. Usually the writer acts alone, though occasionally two people will join their names to the same tablet. Here are just a few of my favorite examples. First, this one is quite intriguing. It reads, "By the gods of all in all, let all be destroyed." It reads, "By Jupiter and Mercury, I desire no evil to befall Tiberius Claudius Secundio, but may fortune restore him to me." It's easy to assume that, since we're dealing with texts written in Latin, these cursed tablets are somehow more legible than other forms of ancient writing. On this particular example, we see someone calling another person a whore, but also offering to forgive her if she returns his tunic. The language is often coarse, and the subject matter less than savory. They challenge us to consider the kinds of problems ordinary people faced in antiquity. So the next time you're frustrated, try not to worry. Take a deep breath. Don't blow a gasket. Just take a piece of lead and scratch out your frustrations. Maybe that'll help. They reward us with a glimpse into the private lives of Romans and their strategies for managing public misfortunes. They remind us that regardless of place or time period, humans everywhere confront the same problems. Someone stole my keys. My neighbor won't stop playing music. I think my partner is cheating on me. What are we to do? Not only does this present challenges for those of us trying to study them, but it also means that many of the cursed tablets have been lost to history. Scholars rely on public institutions like museums to publish texts that fit into their mandate. For example, institutions like the British Museum and the University of Innsbruck, whose special collections house many of the cursed tablets produced in Roman Britain. However, when it comes to explicit language, museums are often reluctant to display the full text of a cursed tablet. I want to stress that this is nothing personal on the part of these institutions, but rather a reflection of the limits of academic discourse in the early 21st century. But that's not really the case. Each cursed tablet is unique, and we can only understand them because of the work of generations of classicists, epigraphers, and archaeologists. The discovery of cursed tablets began during the Renaissance. Thousands have been found since. They're such common finds that entire museum exhibits are dedicated to them, such as this one here at the British Museum. In this case, it seems that the author wishes for the return of someone who has gone missing, perhaps stolen away by another. The author doesn't wish for anything bad to happen to the thief, merely that fortune will restore the missing person to them. Cursed tablets frequently make mention of women, often in negative terms, and frequently contain references to sexual activity, including extramarital affairs. In the late 19th century, these sorts of topics were more readily discussed than they are today. Consequently, some cursed tablets published in the 1800s haven't been reprinted in modern times. Written on the fragment of a bronze mirror, this cursed tablet reflects Roman anxieties about the potency of curses. The phrase of all is particularly telling. The author doesn't specify any gods in particular, but instead appeals to all the gods there are. It's as if they've reached the end of their proverbial rope, clutching at any deity who will listen. Others are what we might think of as group curses. Several individuals may appear on the same tablet, either because they all accuse the same person, or because each person makes their own accusation, creating a cacophony of grievances. Finally, there are curses delivered by professionals, usually attached to figurines or votive offerings of deities such as Sylvanus or the Lares. These are not personal curses, but rather ritual incantations designed to enlist the aid of the gods in a dispute. Lead was an important medium for writing in the ancient world. It was malleable, easy to carve, and its markings could be erased if necessary. The sheets were cheap, though not so cheap that they would bear witness to some of the most intimate, and personal aspects of Roman daily life. He has condemned me and my father to death and broken the doors and shutters of our house. In this curse. The author uses the accusative singular perfect tense of the verb condamno, meaning he condemned, or more precisely, he pronounced sentence on. What this suggests is that the accused, Marcus Livius Secundio, wasn't necessarily responsible for the condemnation or death sentence, but rather that he was instrumental in having it carried out. From contracts to wills, household accounts, and even love spells. In particular, I study inscriptions on lead from domestic contexts like houses and villas. This topic is a bit of a change from what I normally discuss, but it feels timely given recent events. After all, isn't the new year always a time for a fresh start, for resolutions? In today's video, we will explore the tiny but significant world of Roman curse tablets. As a side note, I want to say that the term curse tablet is a modern term. Ancient Romans would have seen these as religious objects used in magic or medicine, not curse tablets. For ease of discussion, I'll refer to them as curse tablets throughout this video. Curse tablets are small pieces of lead, usually thin sheets that were folded, rolled, cut, or otherwise manipulated before being inscribed. So how did these small, seemingly insignificant pieces of lead come to fill so many museum shelves and university archives? Well, it helps to understand why people might want to curse someone in the first place. The word curse comes from the Latin root interesse, which means to be between, to be involved in, or to take an interest in. That's probably not the definition you were expecting, right? Curses aren't typically seen as positive things. However, in the ancient world, making a curse was a way of getting involved in a situation, of taking an interest, almost a form of self-advocacy. Roman curse tablets are usually brief and may feature a list of complaints or accusations against another person or persons. They do not necessarily involve wishes for harm to befall the accused, although many do. Instead, a curse tablet might condemn a person for a crime or transgression, real or imagined. For example, if you believed that your neighbor had intentionally set fire to your roof, you might inscribe a curse tablet accusing them of arson. Whether or not you believed them guilty, it was up to the gods to decide. There are three main types of curse tablets. Some, like the one displayed here in the British Museum, are simple declarations made by a single person against another. Of the 275 curse tablets held by the British Museum, 283 of them feature one author, 29 have multiple authors, and 18 feature a dedicant and a recipient. Here is a second tablet. May evil fortune befall Marcus Livius Secundio. Finally, here's a third tablet, this one with a happy ending, at least by comparison to many of the others. How do we know what these curses mean? Reading curse tablets can be difficult since they're rarely polite. The decision to publish curse tablets has also been influenced by changing attitudes towards women and sexuality. For all of these reasons, exploring the world of Roman curse tablets is both challenging and rewarding. In the ancient world, one option was to compose a curse tablet. You can dine like a king. Well, technically you could, because we here at Wendover do live in a simulation. So if we wanted to, we could just code ourselves access to all the food, including chicken that tastes like beef and sugar skulls made out of rice paper. But what fun is that? No. The only way to get our virtual hands on some authentic medieval cuisine is to book a flight to a historical recreation site where someone else did the coding. So we do and have to. And then make sure we don't die of dysentery before reaching the destination. And I couldn't help but notice that everyone was getting up to dance except me. My group's dinner consisted of Dutch oven stew, cornbread, beans, and squash. It turns out that beans and squash were staples in the 1600s. They grew well in North America and were protein-packed and easy to store. After a long day of work, we ordered Thai food. I ate so much tonight that I couldn't finish my plate of pad Thai. I feel bad wasting food. In fact, I feel bad wasting anything. It's like when I was in college, I'd save my orange peels to squeeze just a little bit more juice out of them. Or in high school, I used to read every page in my textbook, even the ones assigned as extra credit reading. Not that I was trying to impress anyone or get straight A's, I just hate throwing things away. That's why it feels good to know that our show isn't going to waste anything, because it's made possible by our supporters. It was interesting to try these foods in this style, because I usually eat them in chili or casseroles. You even get exclusive perks like bloopers, behind-the-scenes posts, and personalized messages. But the best part is that you get access to our secret server It's a place where our whole community can chat, play games, hang out, and share cool stuff. The other day, one of our fans posted a picture of their new baby, and everyone in the server was swooning over how cute he is. Becoming a patron is super easy. You can sign up on our support page. Links are in the description. And we have membership tiers that fit any budget. If you join at the $7 tier, you'll get access to our exclusive podcast. I've been talking about this amazing new Chipotle burrito that I tried today, and my co-host has been trying to convince me that pineapple belongs in a burrito. As of right now, the pineapple people have lost, but it's close. So if you're on the fence about supporting us, listening to the podcast might be the push you need. And although eating bland foods might sound miserable, I think the idea of blandness is overrated. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye. There are plenty of foods that are satisfying without any seasoning. For example, boiled potatoes are pretty bland, but who doesn't love a boiled potato? Okay, maybe that was a bad example because I personally can't eat potatoes without seasoning. And to be fair, we were camping and cooking over a fire, so we couldn't really add salt and pepper. But I was surprised at how much I liked everything. Maybe I'm getting soft. It's just not my thing. Okay, yes, I'm a dork. I don't like dancing. I don't like being the center of attention. I'm not very good at it. But come on, how was I supposed to know that everyone at this dinner party would get up to dance? Thankfully, we weren't staying at D Pastor, otherwise I would have been forced to join in. So after the group dance number, we went back to the campsite. That is exactly what we did last week when we visited Valiantly, a living history museum in New Hampshire. When we arrived, it was nighttime, but instead of showing you the campsite, where we slept on the ground in 1620s replica tents, we decided to start this tour at dinner. We're going to finish off this episode with a quick trip to the Valiantly trading post where we bought supplies for our camp. You know, things like freeze-dried food, sleeping bags, propane, lanterns, and ammunition. We don't know if we'll ever be able to survive off the land, so we gotta be prepared. Plus, there was a mannequin dressed like a Puritan woman that we felt compelled to buy duct tape and bubble wrap from. If you'd like to learn more about Valor, check out the link in the description. And we're starting tonight's episode with dinner too, because after a long day of travel, we were hungry. And luckily, we had reservations at De Pastor, which is Italian for at the Shepherd's. We did want to talk about the food. And the good news is that the food was delicious. Our table shared several appetizers, including bruschetta, which is grilled bread rubbed with garlic and topped with fresh tomatoes and basil. We also got polenta fries, which were fried until crispy and topped with melted cheese. Then came the pasta dishes. I ate so much on this trip that I actually gained weight. A lot of the time, I'd eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner on set. So typically my meals consist of whatever I can grab quickly. On this trip, I opted for salad wraps and bananas, and even some frozen lasagna. But you know what I didn't eat? Salad. Everything I ate was delicious. I'm craving pasta. Because the food is as authentically Italian as the name is. All right, let's eat. The restaurant is in a converted barn that seats over 150 people. We started with an aperitivo, which is an Italian pre-dinner drink. Our drinks came with a little appetizer called crastine, which is toasted bread rubbed with garlic and topped with a puree of some kind of bean. But the real attraction was the view. The best thing about dining at De Pastor is that the meal comes with entertainment. There was a juggler and fire spinner outside, and inside they had live folk music and dancing. And since these were professional performers, we didn't need to tip them with gold coins. All right, enough small talk. Let's get to the important stuff. How was the food? Now, back to the show. After dinner, there was a singing performance, and then a group dance number. After we set up camp, we ate dinner together around the campfire. I know what you're thinking. Look at this big softy getting his hands dirty with real food cooked over a real fire. What a wimp. It's Tuesday night and we're having takeout again. Our patrons and channel members are awesome. You'll help us pay our crew, rent studio space, and buy props. Once again, thank you to everyone who helps us make this show. I guess it's time to say goodbye.